For scientific discovery, give me Scott. For speed and efficiency of travel, give me Amundsen. But when disaster strikes and all hope is lost, get down on your knees and pray for Shackleton. What led Raymond Priestley, geologist and explorer, to single out Ernest Shackleton, a man born just 15 kilometers from this theater, amongst the two other major figures of the heroic age of Antarctic exploration? During this period, in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, it was these three men that distinguished themselves as trailblazers, leading their men beyond the limits of physical endurance and scientific innovation in pursuit of history and legacy. Leadership is something that is often overcomplicated, but it is simple in its function. It is about motivating and marshalling individual action towards collective objective. And while all three achieved astounding objectives, it was Shackleton that had a unique ability to manage people. In this presentation, I hope to demonstrate that Shackleton was a master of psychology, achieving the single greatest feat of this heroic age, not just through grit and toughness and ambition, but through empathy, sensitivity, and above all, humanity. So, Shackleton's endurance expedition set out in December 1914 from South Georgia with the intention of traversing the Antarctic continent on foot from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea, something that had never been done, a 3,000-kilometer journey. However, unfortunately, very early, this objective was soon abandoned. The Endurance, by January 1915, had gotten completely trapped in the dense pack ice. Despite the crew's best efforts, she remained there, helplessly stranded and drifting until November of that year, when she finally succumbed to the ice's grip and sank. As Shackleton said, whatever the ice takes, it keeps. So, after salvaging whatever they could, Shackleton's 28 men found themselves with no ship, with no shelter, and no hope of rescue in the single most remote and inhospitable land on planet Earth. They were marooned 1,600 kilometers from civilization with no form of communication, and they were now simply at the mercy of the bitter cold, the fragile ice floe, and the howling wind. So buckle up, people. First thing, Shackleton sets up what is known as Ocean Camp, and he directs his men to haul lifeboats packed with supplies towards Paulet Island, a 400-kilometer trek on chaotic ice floes. Soon realizing that that is absolutely impossible, he instead sets up Patience Camp, with the sole objective of keeping his men alive long enough so that the pack ice can open up, they can launch those lifeboats and stake a claim for safety. In order to do this, Shackleton knew his men needed far more than sheer endurance and physical toughness. So he set about managing the emotional well-being and mental toughness of his men on a daily basis. To do this, he prioritized 3 psychological properties: locus of control, self-efficacy, and emotional stability. I'm going to outline each one of those in turn, describing the what, the why, and the how of each in order to hopefully display how Shackleton somehow, against all odds, got each and every one of those men home. So, first, we have locus of control. First introduced by Julian Rotter in the 1950s, it refers to our sense of agency. What we feel determines the major course of events of our lives. We talk about it as existing on a continuum from internal, I'm the master of my own destiny, to external, forces beyond me control what happens to me. Decades of psychological research demonstrates that having an internal locus of control confers a wide range of performance advantages, mainly due to the fact that it motivates proactive responses to adversity. On the other hand, if we look at an external locus of control, it has only been reliably associated with one benefit: the acceptance of terminal illness. And as you can imagine, Shackleton is not throwing in the towel just yet. So, understanding that his men were set up against apparently hopeless odds, he understood it would be very easy for them to lose faith and to essentially give up, to be overcome by the ice. So, he ensured he maintained the internality of his men's locus in these 2 ways. First off, reframing. When the endurance went down, Shackleton famously said, "She's gone, lads. Now we go home." Thereby shifting the objective refocusing the efforts, and even beyond that, putting the well-being of his men above his own personal aspirations. By confidently asserting this new objective, he gave his men the clarity of singular purpose. Do whatever it takes to get home. What we see is that clarity breeds conviction, and conviction breeds commitment. Secondly, we have responsibility. Again, to maintain that internal locus, he made sure that each and every crew member was given small daily tasks that could produce tangible evidence of success. He knew that these little daily wins would further support their level of agency and demonstrate to them that with effort, they can make an impact here. Secondly, we have self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is a term that was introduced by Albert Bandura in the 1970s, and it refers to our level of self-belief in our ability to reach our goals, to overcome obstacles, or to perform to a particular standard. Without self-efficacy, temporary setbacks are viewed as permanent demarcations of incompetence, rather than simply impediments to eventual success. Shackleton knew that his men were going to be faced with setback after setback, so he had to make sure they weren't going to be defeated by them. So, in order to maintain self-efficacy, Shackleton needed to make sure that skill and effort were recognized and rewarded. He did that in these two ways. First, mastery experiences. Mastery experiences were actually identified by Bandura as the single most powerful source of self-efficacy beliefs. They refer to instances in which we directly experience success as a result of our skills and of our effort. Sorry. To this end, Shackleton was keen to make sure he carefully matched up individual crew members' skill sets to the responsibilities that he provided for them. So, for example, here we have famous Kerryman, tough as nails Tom Crean, whose patience and even-tempered nature made him a perfect fit as the dog handler. Similarly, Frank Wilde, who was a trusted and socially intelligent officer, was tasked with mediating conflicts. By placing men where they could do their best work, he fostered this sense of self-belief. Secondly, we have micro goals. One surefire way of ensuring somebody gets discouraged and eventually disengages is setting the bar too high too soon. So, when the men were hauling those lifeboats towards Paulette Island, Shackleton maintained very modest, very manageable micro goals in terms of distance covered. What he was trying to do was to ensure that at the end of a very grueling day of effort, the men had the satisfaction of task completion. That this feeling of making progress by reaching your goals would further underline for them that if you keep working, we keep progressing. Number 3, and this is probably top of Shackleton's daily priorities, maintaining emotional stability. Emotional stability refers to our ability to maintain a calm and resilient demeanor in the face of external stimuli, especially adverse external stimuli. Beyond just protecting mental well-being, it also confers a wide range of advantages. As you can see here, it improves decision-making, stress tolerance, and it improves social influence, perseverance, consistency of effort, all things upon which their survival depended. So day in, day out, Shackleton understood that discord, pessimism, hopelessness would be as fatal to their survival odds as anything else. To make sure he managed these things, he focused on these 3 things. First off, management. Not only did Shackleton place men where they could produce their greatest benefit, he made sure he deployed them in such a way they could do the least harm. So, for example, here we have Harry McNish, the somewhat grumpy carpenter on the crew, alongside his beloved cat, Mrs. Chippy, who later turned out to be male, whatever. When the Endurance sank, McNish openly challenged Shackleton's authority. Now, to be fair, a week before that happened, Shackleton had ordered for Mrs. Chippy to be shot in order to preserve rations, so you can kind of understand he was a bit peeved at that. But from that point forward, Shackleton kept him close, in his own tent, not just to prevent dissent, but also to make sure that McNish understood that his skill set, his important skill set, was trusted and would be relied upon. Interestingly, a little bit later, when Shackleton needed his 5 strongest men, McNish was one of them. We'll talk about that in a sec. Secondly, we have morale. Shackleton strove to find ways to celebrate and have fun. He encouraged celebrations like Midwinter's Day. He encouraged singing, dancing, playing games, playing football. In fact, when the Endurance went down, he told this man here, Leonard Hussey, that no matter what happens, you need to keep that banjo safe. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I'm on the edge of the world, on the brink of exhaustion, one surefire way of tipping me over the edge is to have a meteorologist strangle a banjo. But Shackleton viewed it differently. He called it vital mental medicine. And then finally, mateship. One morning, after an argument, Lionel Greenstreet spills his hot milk, one of the last remaining creature comforts for the men. He immediately breaks down, collapses on the ice. But then, without being ordered, without saying a word, each one of the surrounding men pour out a sup of their own into his cup. This was exactly the type of brotherhood that Shackleton actively tried to build. Because as you can see here, Shackleton knew that either we pull together or we perish. After 5 months on these chaotic ice floes, the men eventually have the opportunity to launch the lifeboats. They aim for Elephant Island. After 6 days in grueling conditions, battling 30-foot waves, they eventually make it there, stepping foot on solid ground for the first time in 500 days. About a week later, Shackleton starts planning the next step of the journey. He takes a 5-man crew of his strongest men and attempts the 800-mile journey back towards South Georgia, which is across some of the most treacherous seas on the planet. After 16 hellish days battling mountainous swells and literal hurricane-force winds, they make it there, half-starved and exhausted. 3 of the men are completely exhausted, collapse, and have to await rescue there. One of them is Harry McNish, the grumpy carpenter. He had just expended every ounce of his energy towards Shackleton's plan. From that point forward, we have Shackleton, Tom Crean, and Frank Worsley, who have to take the desperate 36-hour trek across South Georgia Island, across its unmapped glaciers and mountains to try to get to Stromness whaling station on the other side, knowing that if they stop, they die. They make it there on May 20th, 1916. Shackleton immediately returns to the southern coast to rescue those 3 men and starts planning the rescue of the remaining 22 men on Elephant Island. After months and months of trying to get back, he has failed in repeated attempts to get back to his men due to the inaccessibility of the island, underpowered ships, and the awful weather conditions. But eventually, after 4 months, he gets back to his men. Very famously, one was heard to have stated, "Thank God the boss is safe." He gets back to the island, and he takes each and every one of those 28 men home against all odds. And when we look at these heroic tales from this heroic age, it's very easy to frame them as stories of indomitable will, of superhuman physical endurance, or relentless, aggressive ambition. But when we look at perhaps the single most impressive feat of this era, the fact that Shackleton got every single one of these men home, it was a story of humanity prevailing where humans should not exist. And that's what sets him apart. Because while Shackleton had strength, he had sensitivity. While he had courage, he had compassion. And while he had determination, above all else, he had devotion to his crew. That, in my eyes, is true leadership. Thank you very much.